Tate Chronicles now transmitting.
Welcome to the Tate Chronicles on HealthcareNOW Radio. And now, here's your host, Jim Tate.
Good day, citizens of the free world. From border to border, coast to coast, and to all the ships at sea, I bring you a warm welcome. This is your correspondent, Jim Tate, and thank you for tuning in today to the Tate Chronicles. Joining me as we cut through the fog that exists at the leading edge of healthcare technology. Our mission is simple. We're searching for beneficial disruption in healthcare from emerging technologies. I'm really pleased today. I'll be speaking with my guest, Tammy Hawes, who's the CEO and founder of Virsys12. Virsys12 is an award-winning technology consultancy founded in 2011, based in Nashville, and focused on healthcare. Tammy, thanks for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm excited to chat with you a little bit today.
Yeah. You know, one thing as I was reading up on your background a little bit, Tammy, kind of fascinated me is that one of the first things you did was you got a degree in computer science. And, of course, everybody's trying to get that now. What led to your initial interest in computer science?
Well, it's an interesting story, I believe, because back when I went to college, computer science was a new major, and women who went into computer science were very few. I think there's a lot more women going into the tech field now, but back then it was a little odd. I went to East Tennessee State University. I think they have a fantastic computer science program, just to give them a little bit of a plug. But back when I went to school there, I knew that I liked math and science, and back then, if you liked math and science and you were a female, you might be a math teacher, you might go into accounting, and I just couldn't see myself in either one of those roles, and I decided to see if I could make it in this new field called computer science, and I loved it. So the rest is kind of history.
Well, you know, computer science has really changed over the years. The first courses I took centuries ago, we actually used IBM pieces of cardboard with punched holes in them that ran through a mainframe. And if we could convert temperature from Fahrenheit to Celsius, we thought we were hot stuff. Things have certainly changed a lot. I know in your career you've been both in and out of healthcare, now in healthcare. What led you to become involved in the healthcare domain?
Well, one of my first jobs out of college was with Hospital Corporation of America, HCA, here in Nashville. Fantastic organization, way before its time in technology and automating the EMR and the medical record and billing, way ahead of its time when I started to work with them. And, you know, to a certain extent, I would say I got lucky because I did not even realize what a great opportunity that was for me. Stayed there for about 5 years and was exposed to a lot of different things that are required in the hospital setting for making sure the place runs appropriately, from clinical to the back office business side. And learned a lot, both professionally and technically.
Well, and at what point did you see an opening and really a vision to start your company Virsys12? When did that happen, and why did that happen?
Well, I think you could call me a closet entrepreneur. I had always wanted to have my own company, but I was in corporate America for many, many years. From HCA, I went to work at various other healthcare and payer organizations, from organizations that did claim processing, managed care, acute care, behavioral care, physical therapy, rehab, and just got exposed to a lot of different, what I would call subsectors in healthcare, and eventually made my way up to the C-level suite. I was a CIO and a CTO of a couple of different organizations, and it's a tough, thankless job. It's very difficult in healthcare to have systems that are scalable, flexible, robust, secure, and that can meet the changes and the demands of what's happening to the industry right now. And from my experience of being a software developer, it was very frustrating because you knew what needed to be done, but it was very difficult to actually get it done. I was introduced to the Salesforce platform as I was in these roles, and as a technologist really fell in love with the flexibility, scalability, and security of the platform. And it took me probably 4 years after I was first introduced to Salesforce to have the guts to go off on my own and start Virsys12. But I did it primarily because I knew there was a need in the market, and it could be a game changer in how systems are deployed specifically for healthcare. And it could allow organizations to do things that they probably had no idea that could be done in the cloud. So I started the company in 2011, and we've grown from there. We do both consulting services, and we also have actual software that we sell on the Salesforce App Exchange, and it's very specific to different subsectors in healthcare, and I can share a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And so Virsys12, how has that grown over the years for you? How large is your staff?
So we have really changed in a lot of different ways as we double down on healthcare, and as we determine what the opportunities are in the market. As I mentioned, we have both an app side where we sell software subscriptions, and we have a services side. We started the company, though, primarily on the services side, and that was totally self-funded. I would hire people as we had the cash flow to do that, just like your typical, startup that is not funded. And we grew very cautiously, but grew fairly rapidly. And we're still, in the whole grand scheme of things, a fairly small organization if you count all our people here in Nashville. And we have consultants also in about 3 other states. We are around the 30 mark, and then we really try to outsource everything that is not revenue generating or core to the business, like legal and accounting and all those things.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier, Tammy, was the changing face of healthcare and technology. Everything from the shift in reimbursement from being paid, a fee for providing the service to being paid for value and clinical outcomes. And so as those really gigantic shifts have taken place, both culturally and from a regulatory standpoint, reimbursement standpoint, the needs of the underlying software has got to keep changing, and it's really an ongoing thing. And so for your applications, I know you do a lot of consultancy work, but let's talk a little bit about your application side, the V12 network and the other applications that you do on a subscription basis. Can you give us some details about those?
Yeah, sure. It's really interesting how healthcare has changed and evolved and how it's transforming now, as you mentioned. And we actually saw that opportunity back when the ACA rules were passed, the Accountable Care Organizations popped up, and we saw an opportunity to help ACOs develop an operational platform to do things that typical providers were not accustomed to doing. So, for example, payers or health plans, their entire business model is built around creating networks of providers that agree to contractually serve patient populations or their members. Well, ACOs, to a certain extent, do the same thing, and then they have clinical measures that they have to adhere to make sure that they're not only paying their providers to serve the member population, but they're also making sure that the member population is getting well. So probably back in 2015, we started working with an organization called Mission Point, which is now Ascension Care Management, and we developed an operational platform for them to do provider onboarding, get their providers to agree to be part of the network, sign all the paperwork, the documentation, negotiate what the arrangements were going to be for paying shared savings to those providers, managing the members, knowing which patients or members were attributed to which physicians, because they had no systems to do this. And then as healthcare started evolving, as the ACA and ACOs started evolving, and they became partnerships with payers. And then also as what we call hybrid organizations, some people call them benefit managers, popped up, that are organizations that sit between the payer and the provider, and they're not really an ACO or managed care organization, but they are pulling together a network of providers to serve a specific patient population like home health or dialysis or members of a health plan that have cardiac disease, and they are taking out or carving out that subsector to match providers or specialists to those members to ensure that they get the appropriate care and they get better. Those organizations don't have systems either. So they're patching systems together, and they may need everything from a contract management tool to a member portal to a claim system, or even a reconciliation system to determine the shared savings at the end of the year. So the market kept evolving for us, the opportunity kept evolving, so we developed a product around it. It's called V12 Network, and it basically does provider network management and contracting and credentialing and the onboarding of that provider all the way through the process, whether you're an ACO, a managed care organization, a benefit manager, or a payer. And it's really been fascinating to see the growth of the product and the change in the industry and our ability to adapt the features in the product to serve the changes that are happening in healthcare. So that's one product, V12 Network.
And so that sounds kind of like a back office type thing, keeping track of agreements and contract and provider credentialing and a lot of things like that, correct?
Yeah, the back office process for getting going. I mean, there's a lot of steps as well to get a provider and the right providers in the network, and making sure that they're continually monitored and re-credentialed, and they don't appear on some exclusion list, the OIG exclusion list. There's a lot of administrative heavy lifting that goes on to make sure that happens well.
You know, Tammy, I'm just going to say, just by itself, the credentialing process itself is heavy lifting, just that piece of it. I'm very aware of that. There's a lot to that.
That's right.
Tracking that, yeah. So
we all know there are many issues in healthcare, and some things that we're starting to see now that as a patient, one issue is knowing what providers are covered by your health insurance, and there's also an issue of knowing what is it going to cost me as a patient to get knee surgery at this facility. And it all fits together because what it costs me may be totally different than what it costs you. So transparency in pricing and having an accurate provider directory now is at the forefront, and we feel that with our systems, V12 Network and V12 IPD, which is Intelligent Provider Directory, we're able to serve those upcoming trends and provide our products to organizations that need to solve those problems. And if you kind of peel back the onion on some of the issues with surprise billing, I think that's a buzzword now, where you go to a doctor as a patient and you don't realize what it's going to cost you, and you get this big bill. You usually get the bill because your provider was not in network and you thought it was in network. And the old legacy systems don't really allow for real-time updated information for you as a patient or a member to know what's going to be covered. So the whole issue of transparency is very difficult to solve unless this data is being kept up to date real-time daily. So we provide software applications for health plans and managed care organizations to produce accurate self-correcting provider directories to help solve this surprise billing issue. And when I say self-correcting, there is all kind of information in healthcare, from claims, from provider directories, from data that comes from CMS, from provider scorecard information, from credentialing systems that are in siloed systems. But we have a process of pulling that information together and finding when things change for a provider. They pick up a new practicing location, or they have another specialty, or they've got another board certification, or they started accepting patients where they weren't accepting patients 6 months ago, or they stopped accepting patients, or they fell out of network with Aetna, but now they're in network with Cigna. So it's complex, but because of the technology that we have and the flexibility and the scalability and the security that is inherently built in to the platform we're building on, which is Salesforce and Heroku, we feel like we're solving a really big problem.
You know, Tammy, you mentioned being able to keep this updated essentially in real time. I think everybody has kind of gotten used to, if they're lucky, getting the quarterly updates. Who's in network, who might not be in network, just the status of those kind of things. So bringing real-time data to this issue really, and as you say, the buzzword of surprise billing is probably the number one complaint you hear from people seeking health care is not knowing ahead of time what could occur. No surprises. Well, what is your Virsys12 alerts software? What's that about?
So V12 Alerts is just a small, I'd call it an add-on, that actually takes any kind of indicator that you want to build in the system and alerts you that action needs to be taken. That's actually a product that we have on the Salesforce App Exchange, similarly to V12 Network and V12 IPD, but we give that product away for free.
Yeah.
Because we feel that it's a nice little add-on to any organization that has Salesforce, and we want to get people comfortable with the fact that the Salesforce App Exchange has a lot of free products that you can add on to your Salesforce that adds value. And we are actually rolling that into our V12 Network and V12 IPD products. So we will be discontinuing it being on the App Exchange, but it's just going to be built into everything we do.
Well, the type of alerts, are these alerts that maybe somebody needs to be re-credentialed, that's coming up, or things like that? Are these business rule alerts?
They are. So it's really anything that you can envision in your business process. It might even be used for an organization that's not even in healthcare, where they want to be alerted if someone calls them, a client of theirs calls them while they've got them on the phone. If you're on that record that shows all the information about the account, you might get a pop-up that says, "Hey, this client has not paid you in 30 days. You might want to ask them about that while they're on the phone.
Okay. Before I go into some other topics about the software, anything else you want to say about the Virsys Network or alerts or IPD, or have we got that covered pretty well?
Well, I think I would kind of like to just have an overarching message. Most people don't understand, especially if you're not in healthcare, how much money is actually spent. Everybody kind of gets the fact how much money is spent on healthcare for procedures and nurses and doctors and hospitals and clinical staff, but I don't think people understand that all of the back office operations that have to occur between a payer and provider, they take away not only from that organization's ability to provide great patient care or member care, it just costs a lot of money, and it adds to the cost of healthcare in general. $2.1 billion annually are spent by health plans in Medicare Advantage just to clean up the provider directory. And almost 50%, I think it's 49% of the online provider directories out there when you go to search are incorrect. They don't have updated information. And most of these health plans, a lot of these health plans and hospitals as well, are using Excel spreadsheets. That's why it's impossible to have anything real-time and accurate as it relates to transparency and surprise billing and, updated provider directories.
Sure.
So it's not the sexiest business to be in, but we feel like it's extremely important to the overall reducing the administrative cost of providing health care in this country.
Tammy, you've mentioned that over time, Virsys12 has had to evolve as the healthcare system has evolved. Do you find that the work that you're doing is really a continuation of the proven legacy foundations and software technologies, or are there some ways that you're employing new technologies such as artificial intelligence or blockchain? Are any of those technologies relevant to the type of work and services you deliver?
They are very relevant. We know that artificial intelligence is a buzzword. Machine learning is a buzzword. And a lot of people use it for basic analytics that has been in existence for a while. But especially with our V12 IPD product, we're consolidating data from multiple data sources and think of it as an engine where the intelligent provider directory is finding gaps in that provider's profile and information about that provider that it is gleaning from sources of information and filling the gaps proactively, real time, as you sleep, so people aren't having to manually, look for needles in haystacks as it relates to changes in a provider. Now, that data still has to be attested by the provider and validated, but a lot of the busy work and the grunt work can be done by the actual engine. And so that's exciting. I mean, it's very different than when I started my career in technology, some of the tools that we have available now. And there's a product in the Salesforce suite called Einstein that is a big part of that. And, I think that obviously when I started the company in 2011, I didn't know there was going to be a product called Einstein. I didn't even really understand how evolved AI and analytics and machine learning would be in 2020, which we're about to be there now. But I knew that the Salesforce platform was an amazing platform when I started the business from an actual technologist perspective, and that some very great things could be done on the platform. And one thing that I haven't mentioned is as excited as we are as a company about building our company around Salesforce got excited in the things that we're doing for healthcare back last summer, and they have a corporate venture arm called Salesforce Ventures, and they made an investment in us last summer. So we're really proud of that. So we feel like it's a very symbiotic relationship that we have to go to market together and really transform healthcare.
The time is flying by. We only have about 3 or 4 more minutes, Tammy, and so there's a couple of things that I definitely want to touch base with you about. Not only are you running Virsys12 and keeping that up to speed, you also have a podcast on HealthcareNOWradio.com called How I Transform This. Who do you interview? What's the vision of that podcast?
So that has been so much fun for me to do. We are in Nashville, obviously, and there are a lot of very well-known and thought-provoking transformational leaders in healthcare here. But we also work with organizations in over 32 states now. And we have seen some very transformational technology projects happen over the past 3 or 4 years. And so we've talked to industry leaders who have made this happen. And it's most people think of healthcare as hospitals or as an insurance company, but there's so many other types of organizations that impact healthcare, from venture capitalists that invest in healthcare technology to marketing agencies that help with patient engagement. We've interviewed people who provide healthcare in prisons, med spas. The list just goes on and on.
Sure.
And obviously we have interviewed CIOs, CTOs, COOs, CEOs of hospital systems, health systems, well-recognized brand names in healthcare throughout the country. And they have each a very unique, fascinating story.
It's a great way, as you mentioned, to connect with people, just like I'm being able to connect with you. How can our listeners find out more about Virsys12 and contact you? Well,
we're on Twitter at Virsys12 and LinkedIn at Virsys12, VIRSYS12. Also, you can find us on the website at Virsys12.com. And I think that it's very easy to find me.
I know, it is. Well, and one thing before we start recording, I remember you told me that you and some of your team is going to be at the HIMSS conference in Orlando, second week of March. And I'm sure any of our listeners can reach out ahead of time and schedule some time to sit down with you and your team and talk over things in more detail.
We would love that. As everyone knows, HIMSS is a fantastic conference, and we're there every year. You can reach out to us through any of these forms, and we also have a form on our website to contact us, and we'd be glad to chat and definitely meet at HIMSS.
Well, great. To our audience, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Tate Chronicles. I offer a special salute to my guest today, Tammy Hawes of Virsys12. Tammy, thanks for coming aboard today with us.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you today.
You can find more information on this show's program page at HealthcareNOWradio.com. Until we meet again, here's wishing you smooth sailing and safe harbors.
Tate Chronicles transmission ending now.